You are entering the Nillyverse with your hosts Gustavo and Rodney Perry. This episode has been brought to you by the Society of Namecoin. No. Record on this computer. There
Record.
you go. All right. There we are.
Well, good morning.
Good morning.
So today we're going to do a really interesting thing. This is an area. We're going to talk about the pattern of knowing.
Oh,
and I realized when I was getting ready to just think about this again that a lot of our book is about epistemology. You know, the big word for how you know stuff.
Right.
And I think that's inherent to the whole notions that we're dealing with nothing and nothingness, is that it immediately comes up. Well, how do you know these things?
Right.
How do you know about nothing and nothingness? And we're working our way toward that. And I hadn't realized that we were so much epistemic discussion, but it's true. We have a lot of it, and it seems to be necessary. So today we'll talk about pattern of knowing. I really like this area. We talked a little bit earlier about Kurt Gödel, and we talked about he was interviewed, and someone found that he was very agile in that he could deal with very rare insights as well as very mathematical kind of rigorous thinking, that he was very good at both of them, and we kind of admired him for that. Mm-hmm. And you remember he was the fellow we talked about when during the dangers of talking about the void, because at the end of his life he essentially starved himself to death because he had a kind of a paranoia that his wife had to taste all his food. Remember, right. It's a great story. And then when his wife got sick, he wouldn't eat, so he starved himself to death. So I don't know. He was good at insight and good at rational thought, but he couldn't figure out how to get a sandwich down there without his wife. So I'm not sure we're talking about him as a complete character. But anyway, he's a very interesting fellow from Austria, and we'll come back to him later too with the incompleteness theory, because we talk about complementarity when we critique and add our thoughts to the popularizers, and we'll come back to him in complementarity. But so for nihilology, that's sort of the beginning. This kind of, we talked about his mental agility, but we are asking something, a kind of skill that's even maybe beyond that a little bit, and we are asking that people who want to really appreciate what we're saying in our book about the differentiation of nothing and nothingness, and the heuristic use, the usefulness of nothing in interpreting books from science and so forth. We were asking them to actually become very agile in taking in the information from religion, philosophy, and science. Mm-hmm. It's a big request.
Big ask.
Yes, it's a very big ask, but nonetheless, it seems as though you'll have a much better understanding of nothing and its import in science if you take your information from all those fields. And I wanted to tell a funny story. There's a story that I like to tell of, and I was thinking this morning, I think it was at Trinity College in Hartford when I did this the first time. And I was teaching a class, a religion class, and we were entering into an area trying to talk about the tripartite God of Christianity. Mm-hmm. And so when we were going to enter into that discussion that day, I came in early on purpose to stand at the front of the class, and didn't go to a podium or anything, but just stood at the front of the class. And as the students were filing in, I did in a kind of a silent way. I didn't say anything at the beginning. That I started tossing a rubber ball, up and down in my hand. This is the first one I had was purple. And I tossed a purple ball up in my hand, and then I tossed it into the other hand, up and down, and then in between my hands, up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down. And I said nothing. And the students kept coming in, and then you know what students do. They're looking for a place to, well, these days they're trying to get off their cell phones and that sort of thing and trying to focus on a class. And so they just came in, and they weren't really paying much attention to me because I was at the front of the class and we knew each other already, and it was a little bit early. So then I got out another ball, and this ball was blue. And I tossed them up and down in one hand, and I tossed them up and down in the other hand, and I tossed them between the hands and so forth. So I did that again, also being silent. Finally, some of the kids started watching me and so forth and wondering what was going on. And then I added a third ball to this. And so then that third ball was gold. And so I tossed those up and down into what the jugglers call the most simple 3-ball pattern called the Cascade. It's something that I used to be pretty good at doing that. I haven't juggled in a while. I ought to try again. But Cascades are quite simple once you get the hell of the 3-ball pattern. And so I did a Cascade. By that time, all the students were, of course, watching me. So I finally spoke, and I just brought out this notion. I said that the purple ball. And I'm juggling the Cascade the whole time.
Oh gosh! Don't drop the ball.
Don't drop the ball. I'm juggling, but once you get the Cascade going, you can do anything. You can turn around, you see, and so forth. It's not that hard. So I'm juggling, and I say the first ball represents Christ. The color is for his sort of kingly quality. And the second ball, the blue one, it stands for the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, we call it in Christianity. And oftentimes and the third ball was gold. And here I am, got to remember, I'm doing the Cascade the whole time. The third ball is gold, standing for the Father or God and the eternal God. And at that point, I just started to tell them that, like, as a juggler, and I'm still juggling, as a juggler, you can't look at the individual ball. Even if you like gold better than purple, or you like blue better than gold, or whatever, you can't look at an individual ball. And in fact, you can't quickly take your attention from one ball to the next in a kind of, multitasking kind of thing. You can't do that, because if you do that, the Cascade will break and fall to the ground. Mm-hmm. And so the point was that as a juggler, you have to have a certain flip in attention, a certain kind of attention that takes you from individual balls to the movement of the balls as a whole, to the pattern of the balls as a whole. And in that, you get the juggle. Mm-hmm. So that was my sort of showy, dancey way of talking about the tripartite God, the 3 persons in one, to talk about in Christianity. And of course, the point is that the purple is of Christ, and the blue of the Spirit, and the gold of God the Father. Those are only understood in their pattern, mm-hmm. in their going together as a threesome. That is how they are understood. Mm-hmm. So anyway, that's a long story, but it's a fun story. I often like it.
It's a great image that you implanted into your students' minds. Like that, I'm sure that they've carried it with them for
Actually, one of my students I met later, about 10 years later, I met one of my students. They brought up the juggle.
There you go. I'm not surprised at that at all, right? Like I can imagine, the power of that kind of an image, right? And also sitting silent, right? Not saying anything. We don't just jump in with words, right? It's through the action, right? The simple action of juggling, right? That really captivates people, and then you can kind of go in to explain, right? But maybe it's better just to sit and wonder first.
It worked really well. It was a nice teaching technique. And so anyway, the upshot of that for nihilology is that we're asking our readers and the people who are listening that it is in this pattern of understanding philosophy, religion, and science together that we actually understand much more about the world that we're in. And with that, we have again a deeper heuristic for critiquing the sciences. the popularizers of science, particularly. So anyway, that's my little story, and I thought maybe we could do our pop section or hop section now. If you
That's right. Yeah, hop on pop. That's right, and it's incredibly relevant to the example that you just gave. The idea of the pattern of knowing is, in the particulars of the clip that we're going to be showing with David Albert, a professor of philosophy and physics.
Yes.
Who's concerned, I guess, with the issues at the foundation of physics. So let me cue that up right now for you guys here. So we'll share a screen here and share. And we'll full screen that. Everything good? You see the screen?
Yeah, it looks fine.
Okay, great. Here we go.
When one refers to the foundations of physics, there are problems about the logical structure of physics, about the foundational assumptions that physics makes. Whether these problems properly belong to physics or they properly belong to philosophy, when the field is healthy, isn't much of an issue. In my own case, my PhD was in theoretical physics. I was a professor in physics departments before being a professor in philosophy departments. When I write a paper now, my rule is that if at the end it has more than 2 equations in it, I send it to a physics journal, and if it has less than 2, I send it to a philosophy journal, and there's not much more of a distinction than that. When I attend conferences where people are discussing the kinds of questions that I'm interested in, people speaking at these conferences are employed in physics departments, and half are employed in philosophy departments, and it's not particularly easy to tell by listening to their talks what sort of department they're employed in. So philosophy of science, like I say, when it's healthy, is a matter of focusing with a certain level of philosophical sensitivity and sophistication on questions at the foundations of physics.
All right, we'll stop it right there.
Well,
very short clip. We're not really going to dig into David Albert too much here. We're just going to sort of maybe bring out some of the more salient points here about what he was discussing. He's speaking about the problems about the logical structure of physics, right? At the edges of physics, it's when we've pushed observation and maybe thought experiments as far as they, it's on us to be a philosophy that we're trying to promulgate, right? As instantiated by the science. So the way that I like to think about it is that the philosophy is the substrate, or where the image that physics paints is captured.
Huh.
Okay.
Yeah,
so and why I like this image is because I'm also a big fan of classical films, as I think, Rodney, you know. One of my top 10 films of all time is Michelangelo Antonioni's Blow Up.
Oh, yeah. Sure.
David Hemmings plays the photographer, and he thinks that he's witnessed a murder, right? With one of the images that he's captured. And what he does, because the image that he the characters in that image were very far away, what he proceeds to do is in his dark room continually blow up that same image, right? So that it starts to become questionable, like what's image and what's grain, right? So if you look with too fine, the point here as it relates to physics, right, is that if you look with too fine a resolution, right, or enlarge or blow up the picture too much, you start to see the pixels or the film grain, which is the substrate in this case, or the film, right? And you can, and the problem here, which David Albert doesn't quite say, but I'm going to sort of help him out with here, is that you confuse it with being part of the physical domain, part of your field of inquiry.
Right.
Okay. So the problems encountered with physics, right? This kind of problem, right? It's the same kind experienced by a chemist, right, who goes beyond its most fundamental unit of inquiry, right, namely the atom, right? Chemical processes about atoms of different kinds.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's the most fundamental unit. You could say that electrons are what sort of play a key role, but like the fundamental unit for chemists are atoms, even though they grant that other more elementary particles exist, but not for their subject of inquiry, right? For their subject of inquiry, it is the atom. Okay,
Right.
so quark-induced phenomena, say for instance, right, should be noise for the chemist, or at the very least, not part of its science, right? But it could be part of his or her philosophy.
Philosophy, yeah.
Right, by appealing to quark and quark movement, right? So talk of quarks, the reason that it's not science, right, it's that the talk of the quarks, right, will confuse other chemists in the community, right, who have not accepted the validity of those particles,
right,
in for their worldview or paradigm,
right.
okay. So yeah, that's I think what I pulled out of that little clip.
That was great. Actually, that was, I think, better than what he did. He was talking about it a little bit differently, I think. But this is finding the other realm of investigation at the limits of your major research mode. And that's cool. That's a nice image. I like that one.
I also I really like how he sort of decides which journals to send his articles to. Whether if it has 2 or more equations, well, we have to send it to the physics journal. If it has less than 2, we're going to send it to a philosophy journal.
Yes.
I like how it depends on the language that you use, right? To determine who your audience should be, right? Where mathematics is the language of physicists, and English would be the language of philosophers.
Right.
But they're doing similar. I think at the edges of physics, right, is where you encounter philosophy, right? But you have to be honest about it with yourself first, and then with your audience, right? That here's where the science ends, and maybe the philosophy begins.
Right.
So in this case, so just to go back to the image that I presented a little bit earlier, right? The film grain, right, or what David Hebbings the character is sort of being, right, is essentially philosophy than it is the actual physics, or what happened, right? Yeah. His subject of inquiry, right? He wanted to determine, was there a murder there, and all he's getting is film grain.
All he's getting is grain.
Right.
Yeah.
So so maybe it's because you've blown the image up too much, and we have to recognize that.
Blow Up was really popular when I was in college.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a very popular movie, and it was
very modish.
It stretched the coming from a little industrial town working family. It stretched me a long way. So.
The best part of Blow Up is the end.
Yeah,
it's a genius ending, right? How Antonioni sort of has David Hemmings coming having sort of in a way sort of left scratching his own head. Did it happen or not? Nobody's taking him seriously. His friends are all doped up, and don't really care to sort of investigate any further, right? And it's that scene with the mimes playing tennis.
Yes, I remember that.
And he starts play tennis without rackets, without balls.
Yeah.
He sees their actions of going back and forth, but at the very end, he starts to hear the ball.
The clunk. Yeah.
Right. So
interesting movie.
Yeah. So
one of the things that I liked about, I just want to go back to make sure about David Alpert, is he said something really interesting. He said the fields of inquiry are at their most healthy when you can't tell where the boundaries are between them. I thought that was really interesting because it feeds into what we've been talking a lot about. Mm-hmm. And it's not, I don't think that's the kind of thing that you would expect from a Columbia professor to say. I think that would cause a lot of difficulties in his department.
It's true, yeah.
Very good. I thought that was quite a good interview. Yeah. Shall we move on to the next little section of what we're doing then?
Do that.
Okay. So, David, what we talked about bringing in religion, science, and philosophy, the pattern of knowing. And David Albert is a wonderful example of that. And one of the things that I think it helps us is when we bring in the words and the perspectives of very respected institutional people. We see that our discussions in Nothing and Nothingness are not flighty by any means, but in fact are very established in certain kinds of scientific thought. And so I think that's one of the things that we did throughout the book, is in the middle, regularly as we were discussing, even when we were into the rarest of Madhyamaka Buddhism or something, we brought in the science of it, bringing in the science, constantly grounding it in the science to give it authority. And that goes back to, of course, the fact that in the West, the science has the basis of authority. So we appeal to readers in that way. But another really good example, this fellow I really enjoyed looking into, is Andrew Newberg. He's a doctor, and for 30 years now, he's been doing research at the border between neuroscience and theology. Right. In fact, he calls his work neurotheology. Very interesting guy. And he is very agile in both. And he describes it much like you did in a certain sense. He says that we start with all the science. Like he looked into everything, brain stimulations and various sorts of physical maladies that are based in brain difficulties and so forth. He looked into brain stimulations, and then he widened his research out when he got done with the science as far as he would go. Then he would go into studies of mysticism and history of religion and so forth. And so he has an image sort of like you do, that you just expand your science until you go out beyond the limits of your own field. Mm-hmm. And he did a lot of really interesting things with what they call SPECT technology. SPECT technology, I never quite understood it's like single photon emission computed tomography. And so what it basically does is it follows the oxygen in the blood movement of the brain and creates these beautiful colored, multicolored images of what's going on in the brain with certain experiences, and correlates. Those are brain correlates for various experiences. And what Newberg did, and which was when he first started, this was radical. It's not so radical anymore. But he did this SPECT tracing on people who were meditating, on Catholic nuns who were in prayer, and tried to find what was going on in the brain during these rarefied psychological, spiritual states. He wrote a really interesting book. It's called Why God Won't Go Away: Brain Science and the Biology of Belief. I mean, you can see right there a combination: brain science, biology of belief. He's breaking those categories. Very interesting. But there's a famous study he did on a fellow named Robert. I don't know if Robert's name was ever left exposed more than that, but he did a famous study on this fellow named Robert. And Robert was quite good at meditating in the laboratory while his brain was being traced. And he would describe certain experiences that he had. He would describe them as timeless, that he was one with the infinite universe and so forth. And Newberg observes, as he was saying, now traditional scientists, when you start hearing one with the universe, would immediately shut down. There's no science in that. But what Newberg did with his neurotheology, he began to see the brain correlates through his SPECT technology that convinced him that these spiritual conditions indeed have a brain correlate. Right. They have a reality in the neurology of the brain. Now, that is really interesting in terms of there is a border crossing. That is theology and science coming together and coming up with some really interesting conclusions. And so
right, he clarifies. Sorry, he does clearly state though that there is a there could be the reality of his feeling these things. Right, there's something real in his feeling these things. Studies, right, that he's conducted don't prove that these things actually exist. Right, he wants to make it clear, but it indicates that there's something real going on within this person. That it's not just it's
right.
not just an afterthought, right? An imagination after the fact, but it's something that he's presently experiencing.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Newberg is not a flamboyant sort of scientist by any means. He's very down to earth and I find him a very interesting fellow. But yeah, he points out repeatedly, saying this doesn't prove the fact of the sacred. This doesn't prove that there is a unity in the universe. Right. What this proves is that people are having experiences that have a neurological correlate, and in that they are real.
Right.
So in that I find that a nice step, an interesting step. So anyway. So we got these. We've talked about Gödel, and we've talked about David Albert. Now we've talked about Andrew Newberg and so forth. And basically, and I told my juggling story. And these are all ways of just bringing to light, confirming, expanding our notions that it is in the pattern of religion, science, and philosophy that one comes to understand nothing in its differentiation from nothingness, and are able to apply that kind of understanding to the critique of the popularizers, which we're trying to do in our book.
Mm-hmm.
And there's one additional thing here that's also very important, and this will lead us again into the future. I'm always remembering that we are at the early morning of our walk, and at the end of that walk there are a lot of things, and one of them is the understanding of nothing, how to understand nothing. And one of the things that we have to see in one of the things that we need to bring into perspective with all this discussion of Newberg and so forth is that certain aspects of the manifest universe, let's say, certain aspects of the manifest universe will always remain beyond a kind of rational understanding. And that is something that we accept, that rational comprehension is not a total comprehension of the nature of life. And that is something that we constantly come back to in nihilology. And one of the personal kind of applications of that thinking is that scientists need to have a certain humility about them. That we often hear from the popularizers a kind of what I call hubris all the time. I think of Lisa Randall, who said, the universe is a very complicated thing, but we have the audacity as physicists to know that we're going to understand it all. That kind of hubris is not going to be helpful. There's a humility that's needed in order to rest easy with this lack of rational comprehension. So anyway, that's just an introduction there, and I think that's something that you can talk about at something.
Yeah, right. So to that point, I've done something different for this week, and that is I've made a PowerPoint presentation.
Oh no! For you. Right.
Yeah, so that we can sort of, I guess, go
that's great,
because if you attach images to these ideas, right, they have the power of probably, or have the potential of sort of sinking in a lot deeper, right? And so I decided to sort of, let me share the screen here again. And let's see if we can all follow along here. And I'll do my best to describe the slides.
Okay.
But we are we've recommenced with publishing the episodes on YouTube, so they will be there eventually. I've just started start with the proposition, right? We're going to throw something out there to evaluate, right? And that is the proposition that all men are mortal. Okay, we hear this often in I think first year philosophy class, right? As our introduction to syllogisms, right? So all men are mortal. Okay, so what is that? How can I sort of visualize what's going on in my head when I evaluate the proposition all men are mortal? Okay. Well, hold on a second. I thought I would have the ability to. Sorry, 1 second here. I thought I would have the ability to. Oh, there we go. I don't know what I did there. Oh, there we go. Okay, so all men are mortal. I start in my head. My head is my consciousness is represented by that box that you see in front of you. Okay, so that's that's everything that I can hold in my head, right? And then that is represented by the box. So all men are represented as a set, right? A nice little circle floating in the box, and that is so the set of men is this blue circle in my consciousness, and it includes all those beings that are recognized as men, right? Through biological definition or what have you, of the past, present, and the future, right? So if you could have been a man of the past, of the present, or the future, and you would be included into this set of all men.
Okay.
Then I can visualize an arrow that joins this bubble of men, right? If this bubble of men, then something, what? Then another set, another bubble of mortal. And what is included in that bubble of mortal? Well, they are things that will have a time where its life began and a time where its life will end. Essentially, we're defining what men are, right? So as to be included in this set, right? And what it means to be mortal, right? So what it means to be included in this set. Okay, so if you are part of this set, essentially the proposition is saying, then you are part of this set. Okay, so let's evaluate. Okay, let me see. I've got an image of a man.
Okay.
All right, in my head. Now here's a particular man, and he's jumping into the pool of being mortal.
Okay.
It applies to all the men, past, present, and future, that I can conceive of. Completely have the set of men absorbed, right, or I guess nested within the set of mortal. So I have the smaller set of men within completely encircled by the set of being mortal.
Got it.
Okay. So that's, now this is interestingly enough, it's one way of looking at scientific theories is it's as a map of how the smallest sets, taking note of the union and intersection of all these sets that have been identified. So a theory essentially is a map of all these bubbles and how and where on the map they are, right? And how they intersect and are made a union in this map. That is what a scientific theory. That's one way that you can visualize what a scientific theory is.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I mean, we can now extend this map, and we can include not just a bubble for men as we had before, but also women. How do women fit into this? Well, there are men and women, and then there's a slight intersection. If you can see here in the slide, there's a point at which a hermaphrodite could be a man or a woman, right? So we're just going to say that there's a small intersection between man and women, man and woman, perhaps. And then you see that there's a set for horses, and there's a set for unicorn. Right. Well, we know that horses are also mortal, just like women, just like men. But unicorns, some might be horses and mortal, and others might be immortal. We don't know, right? So at least in my head, the idea of a unicorn can the bubble for the unicorn can exist beyond the set of all mortal things.
Right.
Okay. So now let's first came from nothing.
Okay.
All right. So here, let's wipe the slate clean. Start with our consciousness, right? Our big box. And I can imagine our universe as, say, for instance, the map of the cosmic background radiation. This is a common image that you see in science courses, right?
Okay.
So I can imagine the universe being just that, okay, as a bubble of, or a map of this CBR, okay? Now, came from, I can imagine as a lightning bolt, okay? So there's a lightning bolt that produced the universe.
Okay.
And what comes before the lightning bolt? Well, nothing.
Nothing.
All right, and I draw a circle around white space on the page, and I look at the picture and I say, well, is that nothing? Well, no, I had to draw a circle, and to be able to be able to refer to it, I needed to draw the circle, correct?
Right.
And to refer to that, and so in so doing, I have made it something. So it's not nothing.
Now it's something.
It's definitely not nothing. Can it be nothingness? Where it's appropriate to use the word nothing, and where we must defer to another word, perhaps nothingness. Okay, so we can say, we would have no problem, as I said before, if Krauss had come out and said that our universe came from nothingness.
That's right.
I wouldn't have objected to that. He said nothing, and so I have to sort of speak out and say, well, that's not quite right. Okay, so, right? And here I explained that nothing having a bubble around it doesn't make it nothing, strictly speaking, because I'm not currently thinking of anything else. The potential exists that something inhabit the mental space. So if I don't put a circle around it, just to belabor the point, then kind of like virtual particles, right? There's a potential that something could inhabit that space. If I'm referring to the nothing, say for instance, everything outside of the universe and that came from lightning bolt, right? Then there's a potential that something inhabits that mental space that I'm just not aware of at that time. So the reason why I draw a circle around it is I can make sure I can keep it blank forever, as long as I'm conscious of the proposition our universe came from nothing.
Right.
And that's the only way to ensure that space, right, will forever remain empty. Okay.
Good. Yeah, I got it. Right.
So it's not nothing. So the nothing can't be inside of consciousness.
Right.
That's what this slide says. The nothing cannot be inside of consciousness. The nothing has to be beyond the square of consciousness.
Okay.
All right?
Yep.
Now, this is a simplification. This is as far as we can go without, I just joke, this is as far as we can go without falling off the page.
Yeah, I was just reading that. That's good.
Yeah, right? So that's where the nothing is, at least if we're...
Cool.
So now let's larger than we imagined it to be, which has happened, right, throughout the history of science.
Yes.
Elements which were once metaphysical or theological might in the future come under the purview of science.
That's right. That's right.
And that certainly won't invalidate all the thought that went into good metaphysical theory or religious doctrine.
Right.
All it might do is identify an area where religion is no longer needed to explain what is true, but that doesn't imply that the religious authority will evaporate to zero. So if you take that to the infinity, right? Like you could say that, well, then science will keep expanding its bounds, and eventually, right, all religious authority will evaporate to nothing,
that's
right?
Right.
Or to zero, right?
That's right. That's a very confident stance too.
Clearly, though, according to this image that I've presented, there will always be a place for God or nothing beyond what we can know in any verifiable way, beyond the bounds of science. Space beyond our universe to, say, the next universe, we've already said this before, it's now a nothingness. It's no longer nothing,
right?
Because physical universe. So now remember, nothing must always escape, and allow your mind to step across the bridge of images and models towards the unknown. Okay?
Unknown.
So the nothing just remains unchanged.
Right.
It's
Right.
always going to be outside of our consciousness, and and there's no change to that. It's just nothingness. What is identified as nothingness now. So there are new nothingnesses. There's no new nothing.
Right. That's right.
Nothing is eternal. Nothing remains unchanged.
That's great. That's great. That's a great response, to the, like people like Neil deGrasse Tyson and so forth. He says it a lot about the God of the gaps.
Yeah. Oh, I had
Because cosmologists talk about the God of the gaps, and they do it. They say that whenever science can't explain anything, religion people say, "Oh, that's God."
Right.
But then when science does explain it, then that's one more place where there is no God. And so they're saying basically that God is just a placeholder that until science figures it out, then you can explain it by God. But you have a good response there to Neil deGrasse Tyson. You ought to send that to him. He would.
Yeah. Well, I guess the implication, right, is that like what deGrasse Tyson is trying to imply, that there will be no more gaps.
There will be no gaps.
And that's just not going to be the case, because to accept that is to accept that we will never be able to think beyond the box.
That's right.
Or think that there is a beyond the box. That's
that there is a beyond the box. Right. That's good. That was great. That was kind of like the PowerPoint version of Anselm of Canterbury.
Entering the Universe has been brought to you by the Society of Namecoin. Until next time. No.